Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming today. Thank you to the panel, and thank you very much for Laurie Wilson, fantastic moderator. We're lucky to have him here. The idea of today's panel is, as time goes on more and more, we need to focus on the markets that aren't domestic and here in Australia. The opportunities are growing with the burgeoning middle class just north of us. So it's not going to happen quickly, but it will happen. Hopefully with more events like these and more exposure, we can take advantage of export. Our cousins across the ditch in New Zealand do it very well. Maybe we can learn a thing or two from them as well. There's some great Australian companies that export. If you're in the food business like we are, it's one of the shining stars out there for the future. So when we sit down and think about the future of our company, export's definitely high on the agenda. So I'd urge you to ask questions, make comment. As farmers, we all too often sit there and say nothing. Today's not one of those days. So if you do want to know something, or you want to probe, or you want someone to look into something, ask and we will get it done. Thank you. Thank you for, please give a round of applause for the panel.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Look, I'd like now to welcome today's moderator. We've got the very pressing questions here today, which we're going to go through with our panel, and that is the recent trade agreements that we've signed overseas. What does it mean for growers, and what's it going to do for our key exports? And I think it's a pretty interesting topic of today. And then also we're going to talk about, in the great debate, about whether conventional growing versus organics. But to actually the moderator for this next section, I'd like to introduce Laurie Wilson. Laurie's been a director of the National Press Club since 1992 and succeeded Ken Randall as president in 2010. Having previously served on the National Press Club Treasurer, please give a warm welcome to Laurie Wilson. He's been the moderator. Very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Richard, it's a pleasure to be back again this year. As you've just heard, I'm president of the National Press Club. I don't like to be reminded of just how long I've been a director, actually. I probably need to finally think about chucking it in. Look, I'm sure there's no one in the room who isn't aware of just how difficult it can be, and even I have a little bit of knowledge about these things, just how difficult it can be to gain access to those overseas markets. So, as you know, Jeff and Richard alluded to, in the wake of those three recent free trade agreements with Japan, China, and Korea, the big question now is, what opportunities have been provided, what additional opportunities have been provided as a result of those FTAs for Australian horticulture. So that's what our panel is going to discuss. Our panel represents essentially vegetable, potato, apple, and the pear industries, all those industries. So let me introduce them. Michael Coote is AUSVEG's national manager. He's responsible for overseeing the export development activities of the vegetable industry. Scott Montague has a long background in the apple and pear industry. He's currently the business manager of sales and procurement for Montague Fresh, which, as I'm sure many of you would know, supplies pome and stone fruit to both the domestic and the overseas markets. Lisa McCauley is the Chief Executive of the Export Council of Australia. That's a not-for-profit body that represents, it describes itself as representing the voice of Australian exporters, and that importantly includes small and medium enterprises, not just big business. And finally, our fourth speaker is David Daniels. He told me on the plane coming up yesterday that he managed to escape some time back from the federal bureaucracy, and he's now the Market Access Manager for Citrus Australia. That's a role that involves working both with the citrus industry and obviously working with the government as well to improve his industry's ability to actually trade into those overseas markets. So would you please now welcome our speakers. So the big question is just how much of a difference are those FTAs going to actually make in terms of export opportunities. There will be an opportunity for you, the audience members. I mean, we're running a little bit late. We started a bit late, but there'll be a little bit of an opportunity for you to ask some questions to our panel. But let's first up hear what they say. We're going to begin with Michael Coote. Michael.
Thanks, Larry.
Go ahead.
Morning, everyone. My name's Michael Coote. Obviously, I'm the export manager for AUSVEG. So, the Australian industry is worth about $3.5 billion annually, but the total value of vegetable exports last year was about $256 million, which is only around 7% of the value of production. This clearly demonstrates that most vegetables are still mostly grown for the domestic market, and as all of you are now aware, the 3 free trade agreements have recently been signed and come into effect with Korea and Japan, and in the last week the China FTA being signed. So for the vegetable industry as a whole, the key outcome for these FTAs is increased competitiveness, as the Korean FTA delivered us a tariff reduction on the majority of vegetable commodities, such as the existing 30% tariff on carrots progressively reducing to 0 over the first 4 years, and potato having their high tariff eliminated. Japanese FTA delivered immediate elimination of the 3% tariff when the FTA came into effect in January of this year, and the Chinese FTA sees full tariff elimination on vegetable commodities staged over the next 4 years. So with Asia as the key driver of global prosperity, Australia is perfectly positioned. When you consider the middle class from India to Asia, which is currently around 500 million people, is projected to grow to some 1.7 billion in the next 15 years, you get some sense of how demand for clean, green, fresh quality products will grow exponentially over time, and I think our Australian growers are well placed to benefit from this. Additionally, our geographic location is advantageous as Australia can offer counter-seasonal production, shipping time less than some other countries in the southern hemisphere, which allows our produce to arrive in superior quality to that of our competitors. However, while all this sounds very positive for the industry, we still have one major hurdle before we can take full advantage of these favourable outcomes, and that's market access. So the market access status for most commodities in these markets is with Korea, it's now reasonably good, except for most fruit fly host vegetable commodities. In Japan, we have reasonable access for a range of commodities. However, again, we don't have access for things like pumpkin, capsicum, potatoes. In China, currently, we don't have access at all for other than commodities like asparagus, but we only get something in very small volumes. But we don't have access for anything else into China at present. So achieving new market access requires our federal government engaging with the authorities in foreign markets to agree on import conditions for their various commodities. This can be difficult for a whole range of reasons, especially in the vegetable industries. Trade negotiations can be tricky. We have certain pests that the foreign governments don't want to allow in, such as fruit flies, so they'll bar our access or establish unworkable protocols. And even see the horticulture industry being used as a bargaining chip in broader agricultural market access negotiations, where governments may be seeking better outcomes for some other agricultural commodities, like e.g. the beef or dairy industry. And at the very least, negotiating new access can take a significant number of years. So given this landscape of limited access into these markets and the potential time it can take to achieve new access, how can vegetable growers leverage opportunities under these new FTAs? I'll highlight just three key opportunities as I see them. The first one being over the next sort of 1 to 4 years while tariff reductions are coming into effect, especially with the Chinese FTA, Australian growers can use this time to really educate themselves on these markets and gear your business operations to actually build in exporting if that's something you're looking to undertake. And once you can get access into China, you'll be well positioned to potentially start getting some product in there. And the way to do this for vegetable living main growers particularly is to get involved in the export development work that AUSVEG is currently delivering. Second opportunity I see is to explore potentially value-added processed or semi-processed vegetable products, popular in a range of different Asian markets. And the key benefit with these types of products is that you get around a lot of the phytosanitary or quarantine conditions that inspections for fresh produce must comply with. And thirdly, consider other export markets where we currently have good access in existing free trade agreements, because while we all focus on the 3 new ones, we've actually got a whole range of other free trade agreements with our regional trading partners. So vegetable export destinations such as Singapore, Malaysia, and Hong Kong and the UAE, there's a fairly open markets where we can easily export vegetable commodities to. However, obviously they're open to us and they're open to a whole lot of our competitors, so they can be highly competitive markets. So while these FTAs will at some point in time be beneficial to the industry, hopefully lead to increased trade in coming years, and also just very supportive of further trade liberalisation with these regional trading partners. But given the issues that I mentioned earlier about obtaining new access, this can limit the ability of Australian growers to take full advantage of the new FTAs, at least in the short term. However, there are both long and short-term opportunities that exist, and I highlight those three that I mentioned before, which is build your knowledge around these markets, look at potential other product types like processed, value-added, etc. And finally, don't just focus on the new ones, because we've got a whole lot of existing FTAs and markets that we can trade with. So.
Thank you, Michael. Let's move on now to Scott Montague from Montague Fresh. Scott.
Thank you. I'll come from a different space. I'm going to explain a little bit about what Montague does, where we've come from, what we're doing now, and why we need to export. I suppose from an apple and pear point of view, and also from a stone fruit point of view. So Montague Fresh, just for people who don't know, in the vegetable world, is a trader, packer, procurer, logistics provider, and marketer of fresh produce. We're a family business. Montague owns and operates 4 apple orchards in Lagana, Tasmania, Victoria, 2 sites, Harcourt and Narre Warren, Barlow, New South Wales, and Stone Fruit Orchard in Swanton. We have a national distribution network to supply our customers in this country 365 days a year. We also believe, though, that this network should be able to help us to supply international customers 365 days a year, and we've been a developing business within Montague Fresh Exports as a single leaser for about 20 years. At some stage we need to be an export business, but developing exports in our commodities has been very challenging. We've had a lot of false starts and continue to have false starts, I suppose, but as a strategy when we first started, it was to really widen and secure our customer base and not to rely on the domestic market, which at that point in time 15 years ago was very much a duopoly. We have had different retailers being added to the market, which has been a positive since, but we all just always believed that our future plantings needed to be with export in mind, and so we supply into Hong Kong, Taiwan, Southeast Asia, the Middle East and Europe. Why export? As I said, it was to widen and secure our customer bases originally, but as of late, the apple industry has come into a bit of an oversupply situation and likely to continue unless there's change and unless there's a change in culture towards our industries requiring to export. This year in particular, in Pink Lady in April and May, we did have an oversupply. It was under cost sales here and there was very little exported. I just believe that our stone fruit industry is in a similar space at the moment. If we don't work together and collaborate, then it was oversupplied last year, and given the plantings in the ground and the likely maturity of those plantings coming on, that'll be increased over time. Australia has terrific strengths. I probably am biased being Australian, but I think we can grow some of the best, the sweetest and the most colourful apples in the world. I have no doubt of that, and certainly with the stone fruit we have amazing opportunities into Asia in particular with the quality of the fruit that we can grow. The customer, in our opinion, has a will to purchase the fruit despite the fact that our cost of production is higher. But we have to have a will as an industry to want to give them that fruit when required. The challenges for our grower and what we've seen, and this is a little bit more operational, and I'll get to the FTA in a minute for our commodities, but our learnings have shown us an absolute attention to detail, which is required in our export business from our commodities, is not well known within this country, and the detail required, whether it's QA systems, the quality of the fruit, and or the detail of the documentation required, is quite a resource that most of us in the apple industry don't currently have. That's one of the challenges. Opportunity, building a supply chain, whether it's now, our intention in the future is to go direct to retail, which is quite often against the trend in Asia and trying to avoid the wet markets as much as possible. The retailers do want to deal directly with the growers still, whether it's in Asia or across the world, as much as they want to do in Australia. inspiring the consumer through new products and trial management. And then, as Michael said, quarantine protocols, market access, and market improvements also. In the stone fruit industry in particular, we've had protocol changes that have become unworkable in a lot of ways, where we did have access to air freight prior, and Australia has to take advantage of the quality of the stone fruit that we can grow and compete against the likes of South Africa and Chile into Asia. Air freight needs to be so market improvements need to continue to be looked at. Is export for everyone? No, it's not for everyone. The sales that we are making now on apples in particular are profitable. It doesn't need to be at the expense of selling fruit locally. Could everyone allocate some fruit to the concept of export to help bolster the domestic market? Yes. But in Australia we have a particular culture within our industries, probably with Australians, that we can all do it ourselves. And I would really like to urge people to collaborate with people who are already exporting, because the cost of duplicating supply chains and developing business is huge and somewhat unnecessary. If, as a grower, we get a better return. How the return happens is somewhat irrelevant, but we've got such pride in this country that we have trouble swallowing it sometimes. In regards to the FTAs, obviously we're very supportive of any reduction in tariffs that help promote trade. In many markets, Australian growers are disadvantaged with New Zealand and Chile because the apples are not subject to tariffs and have lower overheads. But that's only one side of the relationship. If phytosanitary measures required to prevent Australian pests from being exported along with fruit are too costly to meet, then the free trade agreement doesn't have much of an impact on us. We don't have current access to China, South Korea or Japan with stone fruit and or apples from mainland Australia. So it's, and if we don't change our culture, it may be, or we choose to change our culture, it may be through forced pain that the culture changes.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, we'll move on to Lisa McCauley now from the Export Council.
Thank you. And I actually do have a presentation, but I promise you it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's just that the Export Council of Australia has just been collaborating with ANZ and Hunter Hunt lawyers for the last 6 months to develop an FTA tool, which is really an FTA 101, which will help a lot of companies here today that are interested in looking in offshore markets. It'll help you understand what are the opportunities for your industry, how do you go about accessing them, but also more importantly, what are the risks for doing business in those countries, because that's something that we're quite keen to make sure that a lot of companies are aware of before they head, I guess, straight into export markets. This is who we are. We have been around for over 60 years. Our job, really, what we do is to help educate companies who are looking to export or get into export and to help them look at the opportunities overseas. But we also work with companies that are growing their business into new markets. Free trade agreements, there's a lot of misconception about them. They're not actually free trade. That's one thing I'd really like to get across, and I think you brought that up. They are freer trade. And the purpose of free trade agreements is to provide liberalising opportunities for companies in new markets. But it doesn't mean that they are solving all of the market access issues that companies will face if they are looking to go into new markets. And I think that's something you are very conscious about as well for the companies that you work with and for yourself. Many companies fail to look at the non-tariff barriers that will still exist in the market. And it isn't to say go and look at the market opportunities, it's to say make sure you are also fully aware of the other issues that you will have to look at. For example, customs, market access, all of these can actually be price points that could be prohibitive for companies to look at new markets. Now, in terms of where we sit, we're focusing today on the main trifecta of free trade agreements that was announced last year, but we have free trade agreements with all of the markets that are currently listed up there, and the Australian government is also in the process of negotiating the other agreements that I've listed up there. Some of these are multilateral agreements. There's been a lot of talk recently on the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Talks have progressed there, particularly with the US passing the TPA Act, which now allows President Obama to negotiate on free trade agreements. What I haven't included up there, but actually I think is really important for this industry, is an agreement that Australia has recently joined with the WTO. It's the Trade Facilitation Agreement. That is Australia's first step to working with a number of countries around the world to improve and facilitate trade into new countries. And that is very much dealing with some of the technical barriers that a lot of companies in Australia face when it comes to customs in other markets. So this is quite an exciting new development, and our Trade Minister only recently announced that Australia had joined that agreement a couple of weeks ago. What I'd like to just show you, and it's more something that you can actually take away from today, because you are actually getting the first look at what is the FTA tool. It's been a collaboration between the Export Council of Australia, ANZ, and our partners Hunt & Hunt Lawyers. And it really is FTA's 101 in terms of it is being designed to help Australian companies, whether they are exporting or they are looking to go into markets and they haven't started exporting, to navigate what free trade agreements are quickly and easily, but also provide you with quick information on how to do business overseas. This is a sneak preview of what it looks like, but if you were interested in terms of looking at the market opportunities that exist for Australian businesses overseas, you can search by country, or as you can see up there, you can also search by industry. So you can search by horticulture, you can search by fruit, you can also search by vegetables. And what it will pull up is information such as this, where you'll get to see your product line, and then from that you will see where the general tariffs sit, what are the potential reductions over the number of years. One thing I always like to make sure companies are aware of when it comes to free trade agreements is the reduction is not immediate. They're phased in over time, and sometimes you could be waiting up until 2023 to see a general tariff reduction. So it isn't straight away market access, and that's something to be aware of. So this gives you an idea of what it looks like. And what I will urge you to do, if you are interested in expanding your business overseas and looking at free trade agreements, to hop online and have a look at this tool. It does give you a lot of information, it gives you a lot of useful checklists if you're new to exporting, and does take you through the process of looking at offshore markets. And it goes live this week on the 1st of July, so you guys really get the sneak peek. So there you go. That just gives you an idea as to what I was alluding to in terms of tariff reductions and what you have to look at. I.e., we sit at a general tariff rate in these industries, the tariff reduction goes down to this, and then over time they get scaled in. I won't go through all of them because we haven't got time, but that just gives you a sneak peek on the three main Asian agreements. One of the things I always like to just make sure people are pretty clear about are the non-tariff barriers to trade, and I've listed them up there. It's something that any company should be aware of if they're looking at new markets, because they hear there's market access through free trade agreements, because sometimes these can be more cost prohibitive for a company looking at entering a new market. And some two other practical takeaways, which I think companies often struggle with when it comes to free trade agreements. Understanding how to correctly classify your product is really important, and the tool will help you do that. And DFAT is also working on what is known as the FTA dashboard, which should be live this year and will help companies understand how to classify. The other is understanding certificates of origin. All companies are required to complete a certificate of origin, and if you don't ask your freight forwarder to give you that advice, I do recommend that you talk to them about it. Final things to consider, and I've provided an example market checklist here. We give this to all companies that undertake a lot of our training. Look at the market and then look at addressing each of those issues and weigh up what the costs are, and make sure that you've done your homework properly for each of those markets and looked at all of those different costs. And finally, because I know we're short of time, where do you go to for help? Well, there's the Australian Institute of Export, which trains companies that are looking to get into export. There are federal government agencies. Freight and logistics, there is a new website that has just been launched recently called Cargo Hound, which is a disruptive technology that allows companies to actually like an Expedia. It's an Expedia for freight. You get to put your bids online, and the freight companies actually have to bid for your work. It's a chance for the freight industry to be cost competitive, and we know how expensive freight is out of Australia. Chambers of commerce are also very useful, particularly when it comes to certificates of origin. We have a short amount of time, but I'm hoping that gives you enough of an overview. And as I said, if you are interested in looking at free trade agreements and you're looking to expand into any of the new markets, the FTA tool is available from the 1st of July at ftatool.com.au, and it really does give you some very practical information.
Thank you, Lisa. Look, before I move on to our final speaker, David, just make the point that we started a bit late, so we're going to have quite a limited time for questions, but there will be some time. So often at these events, people hold off and think, I'll wait and listen to other people. But if you've got a question, I would be urging you, once we hear from our final speaker, put your hand up and I'll get through as many as we can. So David Daniels now from Citrus Australia.
Very much like to thank AUSVEG and APAL as well as the sponsor for allowing to speak today. Just to give you a brief overview on the Australian citrus industry, we produce around 550,000 to 600,000 tonnes a year. A third of the national crop is exported, so around 160,000 tonnes gets exported each year into about 54 different countries. The value of that is around 200 million. That's sort of a record year last year in terms of value. We hit 202 million. And on that trade, globally, we pay about $12 million in tariffs. So, look, we've got a long history of export. The export trade was really built on a very lucrative trade into the US in the 90s when the exchange rate was favourable. We also had quite favourable phytosanitary conditions. Our major production areas down south were free of fruit flies. We had a pest-free area established. And things have changed a little over the years, but fortunately in those days there were some forward-thinking people that ran some very targeted R&D programs that could see the problems on the horizon. And as pest and disease issues became worse and worse, we've got the R&D to back up what we're trying to do today. So look, in terms of our volumes and values, we haven't really improved an awful lot over the last, I say, decade. It's an awful lot of work just to maintain ground, I should say, but what we have done is we've, I suppose, transformed the industry to very much an export culture and transitioning away from some of the non-phytosanitary markets like Singapore and Hong Kong, where they're very easy to trade into, but the returns aren't so great because everyone's doing it. So we're really at the point now where we're targeting the more difficult markets where the high returns are, like China, Korea and Thailand. So irrespective of the tariffs that are applied to our goods, we've clearly done quite well and got quite a good export performance. So clearly tariffs aren't really a showstopper for us or a deal breaker. The exception has been Korea. We've had access since the year 2000, so in 15 years we've done very little trade to speak of. And the tariff on Australian oranges is 50%, the tariff on mandarins is 144%, so it's been very, very difficult to make a sale in that market, in a market that is so price sensitive. Adding to the problem, the US has had a free trade agreement for a number of years, so coming in on the back end of their season, we're price takers, not price makers. So it's, all this adds up to making it very, very difficult to make a sale. Disappointingly, because Korea is the largest market for imported citrus in the world, where the US does well over 1,000 containers per year into Korea. So quite a disappointing result for us, where our result last year was 6 containers up against 1,000 from the US. But over the next 8 years, most of our tariffs in our major markets will reduce to zero, and we're very grateful to the current government for achieving that. They've done an incredible job in such a short time in achieving that. I really thought, when I came in this job and we heard about FTAs, I really thought they were distant dreams, particularly the one with China, where DFAT, in my early days in this job, said, the China FTA could be signed tomorrow, it could be 20 years, and I thought it was going to be more likely 20 years. And it's now become a reality. However, I think it's unrealistic for us to think that the $12 million that are currently paid in tariffs are going to go back into the pockets of our growers. I think it's probably going to make it a little bit more easy to make sales, but it's certainly not going to equate to $12 million in returns for us. And we also need to put that $12 million in perspective. We've heard about some of the other non-tariff barriers or the phytosanitary barriers. So in citrus exports, our cost of regulatory compliance is enormous.
it would far exceed the $12 million we pay in tariffs. Just as one example, most of our product nowadays that goes offshore has to be cold treated for fruit flies while it's in transit. There's all sorts of complications and charges associated with that. And the last count I did just recently, or the last assessment, we're spending $6.5 million a year just on cold treating our product. Also, to access the China market, there's some very specific measures required of growers in the orchards that have to start in November this year for exports to take place this time next year. And to establish your orchard for export to China, it can cost anywhere up to $2,000 per hectare. If you do the maths, we now have 5,000 hectares registered for China, so there's $10 million in orchard measures alone. So they themselves would be a free trade agreement or equivalent. I've just got to collect my thoughts for a minute. So I suppose what I'm getting at is there's been a lot of public comment about, the FTAs aren't worth anything without the improved market access conditions. As I said, we are grateful to the government for the tariff reductions, but I think what is poorly publicised and poorly known, that the text in the agreements include or the agreements always include text on all the other things we're talking about, like access to adequate port infrastructure, transshipment through third countries, streamlined customs and clearance services and all that sort of stuff. But most importantly for me is that there's actually a commitment with these free trade agreement partners that we will have ongoing dialogue on an annual basis. And we've seen that with Thailand for the last 10 years, that we have regular SPS meetings, and that means a lot, because a country like China, it might take you 3 years just to get a meeting to discuss these things. So that in itself for us is very valuable, that we've actually got ongoing dialogue happening. And also, as I said, for us, the FTA with China, I don't believe that the economic prosperity between our two nations really depends on those tariff cuts. As I said, we're very grateful, but I think the agreement on diplomacy is far more important, and we've seen the goodwill generated immediately. The very next day I was in Shanghai when we signed the free trade agreement. I couldn't believe the goodwill that had been generated just overnight from people that were sort of enemies not long before it all of a sudden became our friends. So look, I'd just like to finish by providing a couple of examples on where these free trade agreements can take us. When I was in Shanghai, some of you might know that there's a new market in Shanghai. The old one in Longwu closed down, but unfortunately, in typical Chinese fashion, the inspection station for the quarantine inspections is still at the old market, so goods have to come through the old markets, then over to the new market to be sold. And during the Chinese New Year last year, the trucks were queued up literally for 5 kilometres to try and wait for quarantine clearance. And we were over at the new markets just last year, and we saw we were given a tour, and there's a small temporary inspection station. We were shown. We said, "What's this?" And the manager said, "Oh, this is for Chilean cherries." We said, "What's that for?" He said, "Because Chilean cherries are very perishable, unlike citrus, I suppose." And the point is, I don't think they would have had that unique or dedicated inspection station just for Chilean cherries without a free trade agreement. So these are the sort of things I think are quite tangible outcomes that the Chileans have certainly achieved for them. We signed a free trade agreement with Thailand in 2005, and that is coming to full effect this year. So that over the last 10 years, the tariffs gradually reduced to zero. So we look at the tariff reductions now, there almost seems to be no light at the end of the tunnel. They're coming down so slowly for us, 1.5% a year, that no one will really notice a difference, I don't believe, including the consumer. But when we get to the end of it, we do see the benefits. So in Thailand, that tariff is now zero, and now we've gone from no trade in 2005 to around 5,000 tonnes annually, so that's not a bad result. So just to conclude, I think we need to be a little bit optimistic about what these free trade agreements can bring us, and certainly the agreement on diplomacy with these trading partners as free trade agreement partners. But we need to capitalise now, and I'm a little bit disappointed, I suppose, that our plant negotiators in Canberra haven't really grasped that concept. I think the excitement and the media attention these things got back in November and last year, it was enormous, and I really think we should have capitalised then and there while the excitement was there, because even now with the China one, it's almost come and gone without that much public or media attention. So I think the message we need to carry to our government is we need to capitalise on these things now while there's some excitement still remaining. So thanks very much. We're happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David. Thanks to the panel. There is, unfortunately, a short amount of time left for questions. Now, who would like a question? Make point if you could please identify yourself, indicate who the question is to, and please keep the question short. So I don't see any hands going up, and we're not going to persevere if there are no questions. I would have thought there were a lot of issues that have been raised there. So, no takers at this stage. Well, let me, yes, I have a question over here. We'll bring your microphone. It's being run to you now. So, as I say, if you could at least keep your question reasonably short, that would be appreciated. So, no, over here. Yeah, just talk to them.
Susie Green from the Apple and Pear Growers Association of South Australia. A question probably to Scott, but also other panel members as well regarding, there's been a lot of discussion this morning over the importance of needing to collaborate and how they're doing it well in other countries and we're not so well. Just keen to hear more thoughts from you on how we should go about doing this.
We do our own exports now, but it's not necessarily the only way to go. And in terms of collaboration, I just think the amount of money that we've spent and that everyone would need to spend to develop the markets that they want to do is extreme. Travel is not getting cheaper. The customer base that we found within our commodities haven't changed too much in Singapore. And speaking of a lot of the importers that are here with the AUSVEG inbound tour also handle a lot of apples, pears and stone fruit. So there's not a huge change in the customers over there. So I just urge not to go and spend a whole lot of money that is very tight at the moment on duplicating the supply chain of what we have. So, you know, if things are more open book and clear with people who you trust, and I suppose trust has got to be developed, I just think that without some collaboration in the future, we'll be forced to change in a way that's not fun for any of us. And given the volumes in the ground of certain lines, I think that we need to make sure that we can try and exit some of them from the country at a profit still. I'm not saying to sacrifice exports for the sake of the domestic market, but it can be done profitably, I think. So in terms of collaboration, don't reinvent the wheel because we all want to do it on our own. That's what, in terms of collaboration, that's what I would say. And you know, when Pink Lady first started, when mid-early 90s, and then we had a very good export program through Des at the front here, you know, and we had at one stage probably up to 120 containers exit the country, I would have thought, 300. And it'd be lucky to be 35 at the moment. And that was organised by and coordinated by, one particular organisation, and all the growers got a very good deal out of it. The market changed domestically, we had a lot more buoyancy here and probably less risk as a result of it. We've given up those markets to a degree, so you know, there's no harm in everyone working together to try and regain that market, which I think there is still an opportunity for Pink Lady out of Australia, in particular being the original of the best, and I think that is. So I know APOL work towards doing it a bit more, but I just urge growers to be more supportive of any concepts that are put forward in terms of collaboration.
I won't invite further comment because I'd like to go back to the floor. I think we've only got time for one more question, perhaps two. I'll take a question here and then I will come to you. Perhaps if I've got just restrict your question to one person if you would, and please keep your answers reasonably tight. Thank you.
Okay, I think I'd like to address this to David. What do you think the idea of Brand Australia has to contribute to this particular issue? Are we doing enough collectively across industries, across commodities, and with government to put forward a cohesive brand?
Yeah, in short, I don't think we are doing enough, and it sort of goes back to what Scott was saying about collaboration and cooperation. I'd say our industry does that quite poorly. Although we've got a good export performance, I would look at our traders. I would say 95% of our exports would come out of 6 sheds, and they've all got some very unique brands, so they feel their brand is more important, I suppose, than Brand Australia. At the moment, I don't think Australia has an identity in the world, like France or New Zealand might. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. And that's really what we're trying to sell to Asia, particularly in China. I say it, when they buy an orange, they're actually buying a piece of Australia, they're buying the blue skies, they're buying the photo of Ayers Rock. And we sell the sweet, safe and healthy issue, but the image, the safety that we're selling is actually, our food is safe, not because of the food safety systems we have or the MRLs we have. It is safe because of the environment we're growing it in, and I don't think we sell that well enough. It is difficult when our traders, although they get along all right and they'll sit in committee meetings and all that, they are fierce competitors, and there are some brands within our markets that attract a 40% higher premium, so they're going to protect their brands with a passion. So a good question. I'm not sure what we can do about it, because the question's gone round and round in circles for as long as I can remember.
Yes, please.
I think we've got our brand.
Just address the microphone, please.
Yeah, the brand in Australia is a complete mess right now, to be honest. No one knows what's happening. There's new brands being redeveloped all the time. You have state governments competing with a federal brand. Then you have industry-specific brands. Overseas, no one cares if you're from New South Wales, Queensland or Victoria, or you're represented by a particular industry-specific organisation. They care about Australia, they care about our reputation, and we are not capitalising on that in a coordinated approach. I actually heard a lot of people, and the Export Council is doing some work on this and has done it by looking at other countries' brands and how we fall very short. New Zealand has got the right approach. Chile actually has the right approach, particularly in the food sector. We are about to start releasing a report on that, but I really do think it's actually a big problem here in Australia.
I'll take one last question at the front.
Chris Walker from Fruit and Vegetable News. This is a question for the ECA. Without going into too much detail, you said that it's important for growers to know how to classify their product. Could you just elaborate on? I mean, sure, it's just fruit and vegetables.
Yeah, because we're very short on time and it's quite technical. Obviously, all tariff lines rely on your HS code, and there are various different levels at which the code applies. It can be quite a complicated process, which I don't think many exporters actually know even what their HS code is. If I ask people in the audience, mainly because their freight forwarder will probably be putting that information in any documentation. There is information on and a video tutorial actually on that tool, and companies can go through it. It's a complicated process because you can leave the country on one code, but you'll enter another country on another code based on what their customs codes are, and they can go down to 6-digit levels.
We will have to make that our final question. I'm sure, though, over lunch or a little later, you'll be able to catch up with any of our speakers, and they can give you some more information. So would you please thank our speakers, Michael, Scott, Lisa and David. Thank you very much. Well, obviously a positive reaction, a little mixed in some areas though, and certainly it's a longer term issue in many cases in terms of the real benefits that are going to flow. So at this stage I'll hand back to Jeff. I'll see you again for the debate at around midday. Thank you.